For many years, it has been the practice of the City Club to invite the governor of the state of Oregon to address the club at periodic intervals. Sometimes these have been reports on the state of the state, sometimes these have been campaign debates, and sometimes there have been discussions of particular issues that happen to be of importance at the time. In the case of Governor Atiyeh, he has probably appeared before us more frequently than any other governor. Since 1974, he has addressed us on at least 12 different occasions, and he has always been welcome. Governor Atiyeh is a native Portlander, a graduate of the University of Oregon, and before entering public life, he was president and manager of his family-owned small business here in Portland. He has been active in many community affairs and is a lifetime worker with the Boy Scouts of America, holding the highest council and regional awards for scouting volunteers. He has had a long and distinguished record of public service. He served 20 years in the Oregon State Legislature with 3 terms in the House and 4 terms in the Senate, serving as Senate Republican leader for 3 of those sessions. He is now completing his 2nd term as governor of Oregon, and by constitutional limitation, he cannot serve as governor more than 8 years in any 12-year period. While he is not now running for re-election as governor, recent events suggest that his record as governor may nevertheless be an issue in the current campaign. Governor Atiyeh has had the difficult task of presiding over our state at a time of severe economic hardship. And of necessity, he has devoted much of his time and energy toward building and maintaining a favorable business climate. While a former governor will be long remembered for the catchphrase, "Come to visit but don't stay," Governor Atiyeh has made it his slogan that Oregon is once again open for business. Today, Governor Atiyeh will discuss the Oregon economy, 1979 to 1986 and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Oregon's Governor, the Honorable Vic Atiyeh.
Appreciate the introduction, and I was just thinking as Randall was going through that biographical material that I've been here so many times, I think you would have been satisfied with, "Here's Vic," and let it go at that. This is the 8th time that you've given me the platform as governor of Oregon to report to you about the progress of our state. So in reporting to you this afternoon, I decided to refresh both of our memories about what in the past 7 appearances that I've said to you in regard to my thoughts and my concerns and my visions and hopes, and then tell you what has occurred since each of those visits. I first came to you as governor in November 2nd of 1979. That time I told you that in response to one of among the greatest crises that we ever faced, that Oregon had launched the most extensive conservation program in the nation. We were making our first serious attempt to harness renewable energy resources. For the first time, we were expanding state energy conservation programs into business and industry. And 80 respected Oregonians, among them John Gray and Don Hodel, accepted my challenge and served on a Blue Ribbon Commission on Renewable Resources. Although the urgency of the energy crisis has faded, this nevertheless was an excellent early demonstration of Oregon's quickness to act, but maybe even more important, of the lasting effect of such actions. You don't read much about the Oregon Department of Energy in the newspapers anymore or hear it on television or radio. But if you're a business owner, if you are a government comptroller, Or if you're anyone else with big energy bills, you may be well aware of the work. The State Department of Energy is quietly delivering programs that, and this incidentally are only examples, are saving the city of Salem up to $500,000 a year in energy costs, and Safeway stores about $1,400,000 a year. When I came to you in March of 1981, I talked about two things that continue to be of premier importance to Oregon and Oregonians. The first was accessibility by Oregonians to their governor. I talked about my commitment to frequent public open houses in the Capitol, to weekly news conferences, and to my regular trips across Oregon. To this day, I continue to hold open houses for citizens, to meet weekly or more often with news reporters, and in each one of my 7 years as governor, I've traveled 35,000 miles within the borders of this magnificent state. Openness and accessibility are proud benchmarks that Oregonians should continue to expect from their governor. Also in March of 1981, I talked to you about the President's plan to cut spending. I spoke then of an incredible federal debt of nearly $1 trillion. And I said Oregonians were asking me about the proposed budget cuts. Can we live with it, they wanted to know. Now, almost exactly 5 years later, the federal debt has ballooned to $1.4 trillion. We are grappling with something called Graham-Rudman-Hollings. Poor old Hollings, nobody ever mentions him. And I'm telling Oregonians, yes, we must live with it. I'm optimistic the President and the Congress will be able to reach agreement to prevent the Orwellian madness of spending cuts driven by computer. But no matter how we do it, deficit spending must halt. And let me tell you why. Each state, including Oregon, has calculated what the deficit reduction cuts will mean to their citizens and to the programs to which they've become accustomed. However, as far as I know, Oregon is the only state which has calculated the what if of failure to reduce the federal budget. And this is what we found. Interest rates would rise in 1987, blocking business investment and home construction. By early 1988, the nation, and of course Oregon, would slide helplessly back into a recession. By the end of 1989, the personal income of Oregonians would fall by more than $500 million, cutting tax revenues and curtailing needed public services. And finally, and most tragically, Oregon would lose 18,000 jobs, primarily in manufacturing, high technology, and lumber and wood products. To anyone who asks me whether we can live with spending cuts, my answer is not only that we can and must live with them, but that we already have lived with them. Last year, 17 states were forced to rebalance their budgets. Beginning in 1980, I called 4 legislative special sessions to rebalance Oregon's state budget. Incidentally, half of the total in our entire state history. In 1982, I wrote a 6-page letter to David Stockman detailing what Oregon had done to sop up its own red ink, and I suggested our solutions were applicable in Washington, D.C. And in that letter I wrote about establishing user fees, about consolidating our statewide court system, about increasing earnings by managing our money better, about using volunteers, about delaying the desirable to preserve the necessary. In short, about running government like a business. Well, Mr. President and Mr. Graham, Rudman, and Hollings, Oregon accepts your challenge, but we ask only two things. First, we ask that you play the game with a full deck, that you not exempt huge pieces of the federal budget for from full review. Incidentally, I said the same thing from this platform 5 years ago. Second, if Uncle Sam is going to take away our dollars, we ask that he also remove inflexible regulations that make our job costlier and less efficient. And let me share with you as an aside that we are now preparing exactly where the federal government is impinging on state government and making it more costly and making it much more difficult for us to deliver services that Oregonians expect. When I appeared before you in January of 1982, I talked about the miserable image Oregon presented to businesses that could be creating jobs for all of us as Oregonians. And I told you I had taken personal control of our Economic Development Department, had created an Economic Action Council composed of key members of my cabinet to work closely with Oregon businesses and with business prospects, and had directed my Economic Development Department to prepare a strategy to sell Oregon here and abroad. And now let me tell you a little of what has happened. Oregon reduced workers' compensation premiums from the highest in the nation. We are now somewhere in the middle. I have traveled personally to 8 nations with successes that included negotiations of a $42 million deal for our own Hannah car wash systems and signed significant sister state agreements with the Chinese provinces of Fujian and Taiwan. Oregon saved jobs by modifying timber contracts on state lands and by persuading the president to support contract relief on federal lands, removing a disastrous burden from the economy of the state. Oregon beefed up its economic development budget, and we moved tourism from the Department of Transportation over to the Economic Development Department. Oregon opened an effective trade office in Tokyo, and we sent people out to work for an Oregon on 6 continents. Oregon repealed the controversial unitary tax, and twice Oregon was host to Japanese business leaders who are members of the influential Keidanren. Oregon ground was broken by companies such as Fujitsu, Epson, and NEC. Hyundai chose to ship its XL's automobiles in their first introduction into the United States through the Port of Portland. And when U.S. and foreign corporate executives think of a state with an excellent business climate, they now think of Oregon. Let me tell you what I mean. Currently, we are working with about 100 active prospects, and I want to stress the word active because these are prospects that are seriously interested in Oregon. These 100 prospects do not include the 3,000 companies we communicated with last year in trade shows through direct mail and by letter, nor do they include the 5,000 companies we expect to talk with this year. And these companies represent not only high tech, but also the diverse fields of wood products, agriculture, distribution, biomedical, machinery, and manufacturing. About 40% of these 100 prospects are Japanese companies, and the balance are domestic. And not only that, but last year, businesses and industries expressed their confidence in Oregon by announcing $1.2 billion worth of new investments across our state. And those job-creating dollars were invested not only in the metropolitan area, but also in communities such as Astoria and Albany, Baker and Bend, Cresswell, Harbor, Hood River, Newport, Ontario, Pendleton, and Pilot Rock. In 1981, I also told you the wolf was at the door of the state budget office, but I said I would personally believe that Oregon would be better able to cope with adversity than it ever had been before. Between that time and September of 1982, when I next spoke with you, we witnessed stunning setbacks in housing starts, double-digit joblessness, and the worst economy in our memory. I told you state government was employing fewer people, spending fewer dollars, and cutting more red tape. Today, I can say that your state government budget, figured in constant dollars, is the lowest it has been since the 1973-1975 biennium. Today, I can tell you a unique Oregon program has helped 21,000 Oregon welfare recipients trade in welfare checks for payroll checks. Today, I can report on an unprecedented commitment to reducing paperwork, to cutting red tape, to treating every contact as a prospect that can create jobs. And today I can report that 7,500 Oregonians, elderly Oregonians, who formerly had no choice but to go to a nursing home, now are living longer, more satisfying lives because of our first in the nation multiple choice alternative program. When I appeared before you in January of 1983, we were still anxious about Oregon's recession. And I talked then about streamlining our cumbersome land use procedures, about adding jail space, about pumping new energy into higher education. And what have we done? In a legislative session where more innovative environmental legislation was passed than at any time since the early 1970s, we streamlined land use planning to the point that it is now actually a magnet for jobs. I'm going to tell you something that I'm very proud of. We have 272 cities and counties in the state of Oregon. Of course, 36 of those are counties. As I stand here today, there's only 3 jurisdictions, only 3 yet to be acknowledged. We opened a state prison at Pendleton that was the first such facility outside of Marion County. In higher education, picking up the pace we set in 1983, last year we lengthened our stride with approval of improved salaries, buildings, and equipment. And we will build sophisticated research centers to make our campuses even stronger magnets for companies that will create jobs, both those in Oregon and those yet to come. When I spoke to you in September of 1983, the centerpiece of my remarks was the desperate need for property tax relief. I talked about my hopes for the 1983 special session, which, as you know, produced the abortive sales tax plan. But when I came back to you in January of 1985, I was able to tell you about a plan which was the best tax plan that I had seen in my 27 years of public life. As presented to the voters, this plan would have used sales tax receipts to buy down property tax and income tax, would have strictly limited the growth of property taxes, and would have prevented future school closures in our state. The fate of that plan, of course, is well known to you, but the challenge had not disappeared. Oregon still cannot afford a system that has shut down schools in 8 districts. Oregon still cannot afford a system that since 1976 has robbed students of 372,000 classroom days. Oregon still cannot afford a system that annually pits taxpayers against their schools in 2, 3, 4 elections. Oregon can't afford a system under which school property taxes can grow by as much as 21% in a single year. Oregon cannot afford a system that makes the closure of our schools big news in papers like the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. No, the challenge hasn't gone away. But we have learned something in our efforts to find a solution. Wednesday, I filed an initiative petition to stabilize our schools and to control the growth of property taxes. Between now and November, I intend to invest time and energy in getting this measure on the ballot and explaining it to Oregonians and in winning its passage. And I'm asking for your help. Locking this amendment into the Oregon Constitution will be still another key to unlocking Oregon's economic promise. Well, so far this afternoon, I've talked about the turnaround of Oregon's economy since 1979 and about dramatic changes in the attitude of state government and in the way that we do business. But I don't intend to suggest, nor should anyone believe, that the job is done. The job of strengthening the Oregon economy is a never-ending struggle, and I will not step back until my successor has taken the oath of office next January. I will work hard for the school finance plan. I will continue to work with my task force on the genuine crisis in liability insurance. I will continue to target economic development dollars across the entire state. I will continue to work with those who will make recommendations for our systems of ports, so essential throughout the entire history of our state. I will continue to protect Oregon communities such as Lakeview and Tillamook from the cruel effects of abandonment of critical rail lines. I will continue to fight for Oregon's interest at the federal level, and I will continue to find ways to promote Oregon to existing businesses that will expand and to others that would invest in our state. Since 1979, strengthening the Oregon economy has been the #1 priority of this administration. No other subject has given me greater personal pain, demanded more of my time, or, as Oregon has begun to blossom, given me greater personal satisfaction. The economy has been #1 priority because I know, as I believe you do, the best economic development program and the best human resource program is one that puts Oregonians back to work. This is so important. I want to make a pledge to the next governor, regardless of whom the voters elect. In my 7 years as your governor, I've gained the respect and confidence of the most important business and government leaders in nations that are significant to us. These contacts will continue to be important to Oregon, no matter whom is elected. I believe the next governor will insist upon keeping these contacts, will refuse to break this continuity, will demand Oregon lose none of its worldwide visibility, credibility, and momentum. Therefore, I pledge to make myself available to them personally, that I may introduce them to our new governor, to the leaders with whom I am now working, especially those in Japan, China, Korea, and Taiwan, our partners in the Pacific Rim. I can tell you that the climate for creating diversified jobs for Oregonians never has been as good as it is today. I can also tell you I know of no other state in as good a position as Oregon to encourage business expansion and plant investment that will create jobs. But just don't take my word for it. Instead, I want you to listen to the comments of independent observers. First, from the New York Times, a vigorous economic development team in Oregon's capital of Salem has attracted considerable Japanese and West German investment into the state. Business Week magazine, Oregon offers low housing costs and a highly stable, skilled workforce. By sharply reducing workman compensation rates and streamlining land use regulations, Oregon has removed 2 other long-standing barriers to development. the Washington Post. Tektronix has spanned dozens of offshoots, and these firms have filled the flanks of the Sunset Highway and the Silicon Forest and are spreading down I-5 corridor running south to Eugene. The Wall Street Journal, Oregon turns into a mecca for high tech. The Christian Science Monitor, Oregon has come far toward shedding an anti-business image. California Journal, the plain fact is that Oregon is attracting more businesses than ever, not because it has lowered its environmental protections, but largely because it has kept them high. Seattle Post-Intelligence, slow to start from the gate, Washington State is running flat out, trying to overtake Oregon and attracting high technology firms. USA Today, Oregon seeds high tech. High Technology Magazine, Oregon has aggressively courted companies running out of room in Silicon Valley. San Francisco Examiner, Oregon is on a high-tech roll. The fact is, only California and Massachusetts have more computer and electronic firms per capita than Oregon. Marcellus Henderson, Executive Vice President of the Fantas Company, quoted in the Oregonian, Oregon's overseas recruitment effort makes sense because people in Japan think of the state of Oregon as doing things the right way. Mr. Tomita, the Oregon project manager for Epson, quoted in the New York Times, "We love Oregon." But even as proud as you and I should be, Oregon cannot live on the glory of those press clippings. To maintain and strengthen our position will require still more hard work from Salem, continued vigilance by citizens such as yourselves, and generous helpings of plain old-fashioned common sense. When I leave office in January, I intend to become a private citizen in a state not only better prepared for the future, but in an Oregon that now, as never before, is a key economic player in the world. As you consider your own role in institutionalizing the gains we've made, remember back to where we were in 1979. Is Oregon better today, in a better position than we were in 1979? Well, I'm going to ask you to use your own judgment about that. Consider the past 7 years, and you will see some of the toughest days in the history of our state did not prevent us from making state government better, did not prevent us from strengthening our colleges and our universities, did not prevent us from improving our tax climate, did not prevent us from leading the nation with innovative environmental and human resource programs, did not prevent us from strengthening our business climate across the United States and around the world, and did not prevent us from giving Oregon a worldwide can-do reputation for its attractive investment climate, for its unsurpassed livability, and for its common sense attitude toward jobs that is now the envy of the nation. I want to thank you for allowing me during my entire term as governor to come and appear before you. I have considered this an audience to come to when I have something important to say, and you've allowed me to do so. This certainly will be the last time, probably as governor of Oregon, that I will address the City Club. And so I want you to know, all of you, that I have been grateful for each opportunity. Some have been more emotion-laden than others. I can recall vividly sitting here with former Governor Tom McCall, Roger Martin, and myself, and that was kind of sweaty palm time. But they have all been very enjoyable. You have been an extremely fair group to appear before, and certainly you are community leaders, in which a message from the governor is important to get directly to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Governor Atiyeh. We certainly hope that when you can no longer appear here as governor, that you will still be available to give us your views as an elder statesman, so to speak. We now have the privilege of asking questions of the governor. There will be microphones put up in the floor, I hope, and please use the microphone so that your questions will be heard by the radio audience, and identify yourself as a member of the club. The first question will be asked by our board host, Bob Michelet.
Governor, 2 out of the 3 leading industries for Oregon, forest products and agriculture, are in very difficult times. Tourism is the third of those industries. Do you see in the coming years any major changes in the contribution that those industries make to our economy? And if so, what would they be?
Before I answer, I want to say this, that I may, after I leave governor, come and join you and ask questions from the floor. I am now and have been for a long time very optimistic about the timber industry in the state of Oregon. First, let me tell you this, that last year, 1985, the wood products industry cut the same amount of board foot of wood as they did in 1979. That indicates to you a growth of that industry in which we were able to compete. The prices were down, and they were using fewer employees, and certainly that latter part will continue because of their productivity. However, when you look at the signs, and that relates to the market that would be down south and also in Canada, we see that in the south they have indeed overcut, and they now know it and realize it. That is, they can no longer be on a renewable or sustained yield basis. Canada, if we cannot do anything about the subsidy the Canadian government is giving them, and we haven't given up on that, at least they're going to be moving into more high-cost logging areas, and again we'll be able to compete. There's been indicators that tell us that indeed that the Oregon timber industry is indeed probably in as good a position as it has been for its future, but they've certainly gone through a real tough time. Agriculture, that's very difficult. Agriculture, because there's so much determined not only at the national but international level. Let's talk about Oregon a little, however. Certainly with the weakening of the dollar overseas, agriculture is going to be able to compete. Just this morning at cabinet meeting, we were informed about a transaction of Oregon white wheat into Saudi Arabia, and also that Korea has removed all barriers to the importation of Oregon prunes. So anyway, there are good signs in the offing. I might, before I'm waiting for the next question, tell you that I'm not really certain that the new farm policy that's been developed by Congress, and we're now reading about the dairy herds and all the rest, is really a good program. It compounds some of the problems, but try to work out that. Federal policy has been real tough for agriculture over the years. I'm going to hide, Dan, but go ahead anyway.
Well, I guess I don't have to introduce myself as a member of the City Club, Dan Goldie. Governor, I'd like to follow up on your comment about the timber industry. And I want to commend you for issuing an executive order recently which calls for a coordinated response within the state government to the forest plans that are due to be hit the street in a few months. And from everything we've seen, it appears that those plans, driven by the pressures from the radical environmentalists in the state, will propose a reduction in the commercial forest space of 25 to 35% and a shrinkage of the industry by the same size, notwithstanding the very correct perspective on the industry which you just presented vis-a-vis competition from the South and Canada. My question is If we are correct in assessing what those plans are going to do, what can you as governor do, having a coordinated look at those plans and their impact on the economy, to turn the federal government's view of this around?
Dan, we at the last session, I started by saying last session I asked for some money for our Department of Forestry so that we could indeed really technically look at these new management plans by the U.S. Forest Service. It wasn't going to be a emotional or knee-jerk or even casual reaction. It had to be a professional and highly credible response. And that process, of course, has begun. Of course, you talked about the coordinated plan, and we expect to do just that. I've communicated with the regional forester, well, with the one just prior to this new one, the old new one, and now the new one, and said to them, because you need to know that the Forest Service is coming out with these plans, and the first one has been Deschutes, and then there's a Wallowa-Whitman, and then they're going to keep dribbling them out. And I said, wait a minute, I want to respond to the whole package. And don't get me in this position of responding one at a time. I want to know what the total impact is going to be. That letter just incidentally went out to the new regional forester on the same basis. I expect then we'll come up with one that can be defended, a professional response. And in that event, we're just going to drive to the finish on it, because we can't stand the potential we look at 1 billion board feet less timber than has been harvested before in the past. Yes.
Ray Polani, a member of the City Club. I'm glad that Dan Goldie got up here. I didn't want to be alone. Governor, there are still 6 to 8 passenger trains per day leaving and arriving at the Portland Depot. I'm talking about Amtrak, of course. They go north, south, and east. They serve communities in Oregon and tie us with the rest of the nation. The administration, as you probably know, is pretty well decided to all but eliminate Amtrak. And yet I think it's very important for our tourism industry and for our own communities. What is your administration doing to preserve and expand what's left relative to our delegation in Washington?
In regard to Amtrak, up to this point in time, and I need to make a division there. We have been very supportive of the retention of Amtrak, and our congressional delegation, of course, has followed and kept Amtrak going. Ray, when you say about our tourism industry, if the rails were running and were really delivering passengers and many people were using the trains, then of course Amtrak wouldn't be any problem. More people would be using it. I would say to you there's an order of priority. I certainly would do what I can to keep at least that opportunity for Oregonians, that is rail opportunity, open. But I must tell you, because of the huge amount of reliance upon freight, economic development, manufacturing, in other words, freight trains, those kinds of transportation, that weighs much more heavily in regard to Oregon's interest. In that regard, I have a committee working out of the PUC office in terms of rail abandonment. So we don't answer that piecemeal, but we answer it in a collective form. And they're yet to report, but that's very critical and very important. Amtrak, I can tell you certainly we'll do what we can, and we will speak out on the needs for a state out west and where people need to travel at great distances, less so in a more available means of communication in the east and more populated east. However, that's going to be a little more difficult to fight that one down to the final wire. But I'll fight it anyway, do the best I can.
Next question.
Along with Goldie and Ray Polani, I perhaps don't need any introduction as a member of the City Club, Governor. My question has to do with the part of Oregon's economy which will result from the deficit that you talked about. Almost every speaker that takes this platform, and Mark Hatfield did it earlier this week, talks about the trouble that we will encounter as a result of failure to address the deficit. And yet we face the dilemma that our representatives in Washington seem to be more concerned about getting reelected than they are facing the issues and biting the bullet on the deficit. Do you see anything based on your third of a lifetime as a politician short of a 1930s type depression which will cause these attitudes and motivations in Washington to put the welfare of the country ahead of their personal ambition?
I think it's more dangerous for a person running for office today to not support budget reductions than it is to promise the folks, I'm going to spend some money for you. I think Americans have gotten the message that this thing is totally out of hand. It'd be interesting to come and listen to that person that says a deficit isn't all that bad. I'd be interested to see what he has to say. But I think it's more dangerous for a politician to come and say, we're going to spend more money and vote for me. And I think I say dangerous in the sense of re-election. There was a time when I'll get the money for you kind of thing is what got people elected. I don't think that time has long since passed. We have to do something about it. If you just look at Graham, Rudman, Hollings, look at that all by itself and nothing else. If they follow that formula, all that says is we're going to have less of a deficit each year till 1991. That says we'll have a deficit, just less of it. And by the time we reach 1991, we'll have a $2 trillion deficit. So we can't continue. There's no way in the world that can be good for a whole lot of reasons I'm sure you've understood, including the fact the federal government is sopping up all of the allowable borrowed money so that someone can make a capital investment to create jobs. There's a whole lot of reasons for it. I think it's more dangerous if they don't go for a reduction in deficit. Yes?
Sir, I do need an introduction. Jim Franciscone, City Club member. My question, sir, is regarding the insurance crisis that you've spoken about. Can you tell us, in your estimation, what are the causes of it and what are the solutions?
Well, oh, do I have an answer? I'm not going to give you, but let me put it this way. This is the closest I'm going to come. Some have come up with a simplistic answer, which is no answer at all. You figure that one out for yourself. But I would tell you that the cause, I'll give you a cause, and then what's the answer? I won't answer because I've got a task force out there, and I'm not going to prejudge what they're going to tell me. Two causes. And let me give you a bottom line, then you'll understand what I'm saying. In the nation, there was a insurance loss, casualty losses, of $25 billion. And there were investment losses of $19 billion. And so we have both ends of that. We have insurance companies that have made bad investments, and they've had $19 billion worth of investment losses, and then we've had the insurance losses of $25 billion. I would suspect an answer has to come from both ends.
Edith Zabin, member of the City Club. Governor Atiyeh, there were some very eloquent quotes from some of our leading journalists and publishers in the country about the prosperity of Oregon. All that being, why is Oregon still considered one of the few places in the United States that has not recovered from the recent recession?
I wouldn't say one of the, there have been several out in Oregon's position, but let me tell you why I think Oregon's been slower to recover. And let me relate that our unemployment now is about 5% less than it was in 1982. Our highest was 12.6, and now we're in the 7% range of unemployment. So there's been an improvement. But let me tell you why, in my own just general view, watching the history of things, and we've seen it, there have been situations in the past in which the federal government thought that the economy was getting too hot. And you remember they were going to cool it down, and they would do that by raising interest rates. And I said whenever they cool down the economy of the United States, Oregon would get pneumonia. That was a typical thing that would happen. And the reason was because of our timber industry, wood products industry. However, in those times we recovered quickly. Since that time, however, we've had this massive invasion into what we call our industry by the South, this great subsidy of timber up in Canada, and our recovery has been slow because of those two elements. They have taken away a market we typically would have had, and if I would say to you, and I hope you can imagine it, if Canada were not in the picture, or at least in the picture no more than they had been in the past, we would have recovered easily by this time. But because we've had those two sources that have invaded the Oregon market for timber, our recovery has been slower and more painful, but we are recovering.
Kathleen Berquist, City Club member. Oh, that'll work better. Us short folks have a time with these sorts of things. City Club member, as well as being a member of the City Club's Standing Committee on Government and Taxation. And on March 13th of this year, the City Club published a report on regional government in the Portland metropolitan area. The report recommended the consolidation of the 3 counties as well as other government bodies to form one regional government unit. And your comments on that report, your reaction to that would be appreciated.
Well, I'm not sure you're going to like it, but I'll give it to you anyway. The whole concept of regional government has come about because of a greater and greater efficiency, and I certainly understand that. And within governments, I think certainly we should be efficient. There's a measure of inefficiency, however, in a democracy. A totally efficient government obviously is all in the hands of one person to make all the decisions, and that's not democracy, but that's totally efficient. I do happen to believe that the best government is the government closest to the people. And the further you take away government, the less responsive government is, the less knowledgeable the voters are about those who are representing them. And I really would hope that your recommendation never comes to pass.
Tom Stimmel, a member of the club. In your speech, you mentioned your successor, but you didn't say he or she.
I have in the past, I've said that, but I think I've been pretty well understood where I am on that one. I'm all right on that.
Are there other questions?
Let me just conclude then. Again, thank you. This has been no different than my previous visits with you. It's been most enjoyable for me. I recall those events, and I would say fondly. I certainly hope that this has been of some value to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Governor Atiyeh. And as we adjourn, may I remind you of next Wednesday's program on writing and publishing in Oregon, and next Friday's program by the director of the Congressional Budget Office. And Governor, if you really want to hear him, I'm sure that can be arranged. We're adjourned.